Classes in session. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Unlearn 16 Classes in Session. Today, I have Danisha Carter, another amazing, incredible, intelligent TikToker. I built you up really big right there, so there's like, you got mountains to climb. No, not at all. And I'm super grateful for her being here. She has an amazing channel, an amazing perspective, and what I like so much about you is we're not always gonna agree on everything.
I agree with that.
You agree with that? You agree with that? Well, yeah, a little bit. Maybe give us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump right into disagreeing nicely.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, no, I've kind of built my TikTok channel around those tough conversations, controversial conversations, just the idea that people can have different opinions and still, have respect for each other, respect for each other's intelligence, really just opening the space for dialogue and kind of what's come with that. I also make music, I songwrite, I do a little bit of everything, but my TikTok is mostly based around whatever topics are kind of going around socially at the moment.
And for those who haven't seen, go check her out at Danisha Carter. That's your TikTok, right? At Danisha,
Yes.
That's what it is. Amazing. Go check that out. But you do it stone cold, straight face. You can talk about anything, and she does it like you just do it so well. And that's what drew me in was this idea that you were talking about these subjects that have people way up at 10, and you're talking about them, let's say, at a 3 with no facial expression whatsoever. How do you do that?
I like to keep it calm.
That's not calm.
Nice and zen.
It's like, AI calm. Like it's almost on that level and people are like, how do you stay so calm? But I saw one of your posts where you're like, listen, I don't make these posts in the height of emotion.
Yeah.
I read them, I understand the topic, and then could you imagine if everybody just
lay the facts out, state your opinion. We can do it.
Lay it out. All right.
Lay it out.
Now, what we've had a couple of cool conversations, and what I love is that I think we both have sort of similar perspectives in having great conversations and divergent points of view, which is amazing because if we're all talking the same, that's really, really boring. But some of the issues that I want to be able to we're just going to talk about like minimal stuff like feminism and how to fix sexism. And maybe we could fix censorship. We'll fix the whole Joe Rogan mess.
Stuff we do, over breakfast, over tea.
In an hour.
Casual things.
Let's get into it. Feminism. Would you consider yourself a feminist?
If you had asked me that a year ago, I would have said no.
Okay. But now, why would you have said no a year ago?
I would have said no a year ago because I genuinely bought into, I guess, the concept of like feminism no longer being about the equality of men and women and more so being about misandry, I guess you would say. People say that's not a thing, but for lack of better terminology.
Misandry? No, it's a fantastic word. Yeah, you might want to explain that. Explain that a little bit for the people listening or watching.
Misandry?
Yeah.
Being like, I guess, an aggressive for woman type of person is what that would be. I don't know what the specific definition is, but I guess it would be the equivalent of like your manosphere, but as a woman.
Yeah, the opposite there of misogyny, right? The idea
exactly. Yeah. But as I've talked more about it and learned more about it, I don't want to give credence to the idea that feminism has turned into that because I don't think it hasn't. I don't want people who are outliers and who are the loudest and the worst of a group to get to claim the name of what something was originally for. I feel like that kind of, just gives it to them.
Right.
Feminism is still about the social, political, economic equality between men and women, and I'm completely for that, of course.
So here comes the bumpy road. So you've come along. Over the year, you've kind of understood. I think you've always been for the end result. You just didn't like the way that labels have maybe been used to divide. And so, if our goal is the same, how do we get there? Do you have an idea of how to traverse that?
I think, and this is probably the most simplistic or I don't know, perspective on it, but it's kind of in my content to a certain extent. Something with the calmness or some of the purpose of the calmness is to get people to understand that not everything has to be treated like an inflammatory hot button issue, even sometimes if it is. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely things that I'm incredibly passionate about that I could absolutely raise my voice and scream and get angry about. But when you do
Right.
that, you put everybody on the defense. Nobody's
Mm.
listening to each other. Nobody wants to have the conversation. And so I've kind of tried to make my page and make the way I go about talking about these topics nuanced, and where people are aware you can come in and you can have this conversation, and it makes people who have those aversions to maybe identifying as a feminist or whatever other aversions they would have be willing to sit down and talk to you if you have, the patience and the time. Not saying that it's your responsibility to do that, but if you want to have those conversations, you have to make the
Right.
environment comfortable enough to do so.
Absolutely. I think, and so you would say the best direct line is through conversation.
I
That's
think
it.
conversation. And
Putting
then
it out
going out
front.
and, of course, demonstrating the good behavior you claim, or the, whatever you claim to represent, actually demonstrating that through your behavior.
Now, would you agree that let's say issues of sexism or patriarchy exist on a functional or a structural level?
Absolutely.
Okay, so and you would still say that the best way to overcome or dismantle those are through talk. What about things like affirmative action?
I think it starts with a conversation. Ooh, who's calling me? Sorry about that. I
Important
think it
phone.
starts with a
Should have picked it up and
conversation.
made it a part of the show.
Huh?
Should have just picked it up, made it a part of the show.
I think it starts with a conversation, and then it goes to the action. It leads to the action. We do
Okay.
have to get people to understand where legitimate issues lie, have those conversations with the different perspectives, and then have the conversation about how do we fix it, which then turns into action, then turns into protesting, voting, the reallocation of funds, uplifting certain people and getting them into certain places, whatever those courses of action are. But I think you have to start by getting people kind of on the same page to the best of your ability, which no
Mhm.
one's ever going to fully agree, but it helps to get
Absolutely.
people. It's so loud outside.
Motorcycle
But it
gang?
helps. It helps to
Yeah,
get people. Huh?
the motorcycle gang? Yeah, it
Literally.
helps to get people in the same. So when it comes to things like affirmative action, I mean, you say those two words and you usually really, you know, you put people on edge right away. And that includes, if we're just talking about women here, I mean, obviously this can be applied to race and this can be applied in different contexts. But if we're just going to stick to women for 5 seconds, um, I know a lot of women that I'll say words like affirmative action, and they immediately, like the women immediately come down on, don't you ever give me a job just because I'm a woman. Um, what do you think about that perception or the way that people recognize affirmative action in our culture right now?
I think that perspective is really simplistic, and it's based in a talking point.
Yeah.
Because when you do have the people who go out and say things like, well, affirmative action means you're not good enough to get the job
Yeah.
on your own merit. You got it because of what you look like or what your identity is. And I think the question after that is, why do you think those things are mutually exclusive? Why do you think that because I am a woman or because I'm Black or because whatever that protected group is, they can't also be qualified but be getting the eyes because of what affirmative action has done? I think
Hmm.
people forget because it's been a certain amount of time, or because maybe the issues aren't as blatant and in front of our faces anymore, that there was a period in time that there were such strict barriers for certain groups of people to even enter rooms and positions that they wanted to be in. We wouldn't need or wouldn't have needed affirmative action if those barriers didn't exist. And
Hmm.
it's silly to assume or pretend that every single obstacle from those periods of time, or from that period of time that prevented those people from reaching those places, is just gone because
Hmm.
we've passed whatever progressive law or because we've changed things on a surface level. The fallout from all of that still very much so exists in many aspects of our life. And I think whenever we're having conversations about affirmative action and what that actually means, we have to again ask ourselves, is this necessary, and explain why it was, why it is. And if we get to a point where things are equal and the world is looking like people are getting those opportunities, maybe we can have those conversations
Right.
about, is this still necessary? But currently it is.
And I think it's quite interesting because I think that when people hear affirmative action, they immediately give me this example. Like, it's like, oh, you have a woman that weighs 97 pounds and can't lift a hammer, and all of a sudden she's the new firefighter, and the guy that was completely, you know what I mean? They give that
Mhm.
discrepancy of a comparison in order to say this completely, out of her depths kind of individual is now gaining access to this job, which is never the case. But I also like to talk to people about visual diversity. We're real good at that, right? We're getting real good, especially. I mean, you're in the United States, I'm in Canada, but we're real good at the poster. I think we're
Mhm.
getting really good at the poster, right? This is my company. Please notice I have a person of this skin tone, a person who is able-bodied, disabled, like differently able. I have all of this. Look at how diverse I am. Meanwhile, when you sit at the table or in the room or you're performing the task, all of those people that have brought difference to the table have only learned I get to look different here if if I bring the same ideas to the table as everybody else,
Mhm.
right? How do we
Mhm.
disrupt that?
I think we need to continue pushing for diversity of thought. And again, creating an environment where diversity of thought is acceptable. Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of consequences for wrong think, I guess you could say. And
Yeah.
I, can't or don't want to pinpoint what would be considered right or wrong think. It's different in every single context. But I think we have gotten to a point where even daring to question something or having those types of conversations can be met with such aggression that
Mhm.
we can't get people in who feel safe having a diversity of thought. And we don't welcome people in that have, diverse thoughts. And I think that's why podcasts like this, pages like yours, pages like mine are bridging a certain aspect of that
Mhm.
gap because it's again showing people, you can come in and you can think this. Why do you think this way? Let's talk about this. Let's actually come to some sort of resolution, some sort of agreement, or maybe we don't. Maybe we genuinely do just believe different things, and that's fine too, within
Right.
reason, of course.
Yeah, well, we're gonna come back to that within reason, because I love that caveat, right? Because I've spent the better part of the last couple weeks trying to figure out what is within reason, what is an
Mhm.
because there are extremities that are damaging and painful and violent, and we're
Mhm.
gonna get to that in a second. But then I was thinking, okay, how do I explain affirmative action to somebody? And I obviously I'm a teacher, so I always do it from my perspective, right? And I always give the example that if I was hiring me alone teachers, I'd be, and I think we also have to admit our stereotypes or our prejudice or our on like all of that bias that we have, which we all have it. And I don't just mean, racial or gender based or whatever. I just mean I'm a teacher. I think I do a decent job. So therefore, I have a biased opinion of what a good teacher looks like. So if I was in charge of hiring at my school, just me, I would argue I would be more apt to hire teachers who thought like me. Now,
Mhm.
could they look different? Sure. Right? Could they be I would like to think that I like aesthetically I'm not necessarily, I think I've attacked a lot of those discriminatory thoughts in my head or perceptive thoughts. But here's the kicker, because this is what everybody goes on. Yeah, but I got a really good vibe from them. And what that inherently means, right? You've heard that when people hire
Yeah.
anybody, what that means is they have a thought process that makes me feel good about mine.
Mhm.
So there's the danger,
Yeah.
right? So my staff could aesthetically look different, but we all teach in a similar way. And then the problem there is I think I'm a decent teacher, but my methods and my focus and the way that I teach gets at a certain demographic. And
Mhm.
if I want to get at all of those kids or as many of those kids as possible, I need to have teachers that don't teach like me at all. Actually, quite the opposite, right? How
Very
do we
true.
do that? How do we get at that?
I don't
Oh,
know.
we're gonna solve some big issues. We gotta hunker down. This is it.
I know, I know. I don't know. I guess well, I think one of the things that's really good about you is you're really honest with yourself, and I would assume with other people due to that. I think
Yeah.
if more people were honest about their thoughts, about their biases, about their behavior, about how they interact with other people, that would be such a big step. I don't know how you get people to be that
That's
way.
hard, right? Yeah, how do we get there?
I don't know how we get people to be that way, but I think that would be a big part of it. But also maybe just having the self-awareness or the awareness in general to know that if you're surrounded by people who are all exactly like you or who all agree with you 24/7, something's probably wrong or
Yeah.
something's probably not working. Something's probably not, operating at the highest level that it could. Because
Mhm.
again, there's only so much that we as individuals, especially if we're surrounded by people who are just like us, can really show or express to other people. We need other walks of life. We need other experiences. We need other perspectives to get that full image and get that full picture, especially in, industries like education.
Well, I think in any industry,
Definitely.
like when I was younger, for like a hot minute, when I didn't do so well at my first year of university, that's another podcast. I thought for a minute about becoming a police officer, and at that time, they really wanted women. They were, well, I think they still won't. I just thought for a minute.
Do
My
tell.
uncle, my uncle was the sergeant of ETF, and ETF is like the gun team, right? Like SWAT up here. I think it would be SWAT down there. Anyways,
Mhm.
and so I thought about it, and I went in, and I didn't. Guns aren't my thing, and that vibe isn't like. I don't know if I do well with somebody telling me what to do. I don't think I'm that kind of individual. But when I started talking to them, and now I have, like, my friend's husband is a captain in Toronto, and I've started talking to retired police officers, and the stories they tell,
Mhm.
because as soon as they're out, I find a lot of them very honest, ones that I've spoken to, about what existed there and why it existed. For example, they used to have physical testing where you had to run a mile in under a minute. Now that's a good clip, right? That's a good clip. So to get on the police force and then eventually build up to, you had to run under a minute mile. Now, the
Whew.
funny part there is they all laughed at it because they said, Nobody cares after you pass it." He goes, "You know what it's really good at? It's really good at keeping women out. It's a really good test at
Interesting.
keeping women out. A test doesn't matter. But if we apply it equally, that's why I have a problem with equality as a word. If we apply it equally, nobody can say anything about it.
Mhm.
Even if it doesn't apply to the job in a significant way, because we all know that once a cop's on the force, he might or she might not be in the best shape of their life, right? And that doesn't account for a lot of other things. And then I started thinking, oh man, this is going to apply to every single job, because the more we think we can apply equality to something, equality of what kind of test can we possibly apply that really is truly going to get at who makes an amazing police officer, assuming we need
Yeah.
them, right? An amazing firefighter, an amazing teacher. There's no written test for that. It's 100% subjective.
Agreed. I
So
think
now,
especially when it comes to, police officers, the military, firefighters, people get very specific about metrics, especially in the comparison between men and women. And to a certain extent, I get it. You want, confirmation that people can do their jobs. But I think a good percent of people don't realize that there are situations like that or there are rules like that that have
Mhm.
that sole purpose of keeping people out. I,
Right,
I genuinely think people think we're kind of past those days or those things just didn't exist, and we're very much so not.
right. Well, I think, and for the firefighter thing, I flashed to, the movie Backdraft. I know I'm dating myself. It was a movie. Kirk Russell was in it, and but the idea of a firefighter, you pick up the person, you throw them over your shoulder, and you storm out of the
Mhm.
building, right? And everybody's like, "But a girl can't do that. A woman can." But here's the best part: you're not supposed to. If you talk to any firefighter about that imagery, they would say, if I threw somebody over my shoulder in a burning building, I would be fired, because I would have just put me and them at risk,
Lawsuit.
because I put a bunch of weight. Well, it makes sense. I just put a bunch of weight on maybe an unstable floor, right? instead, and I just put twice the weight on one space. You're supposed to 100% get somebody else and drag them out. And so I think a lot of that imagery now,
Yeah.
right, is embedded because we don't. Most of us have never tried out. I don't know if it's a tryout. Gone out for the team. We've never tried out for firefighting, so we wouldn't know. And then I started thinking the gun team. My uncle would say, women are better shots. Nobody's going to tell you that in this department because, on the whole, statistically, if that's what we're going to talk about, we have a lower resting heart rate. Testosterone jacks everything up. So
Yeah.
women, on a whole, can have a much lower resting heart rate, which makes us have much, calmer, more
Steady.
stable, steady hands. And I'm like, oh my God. So we've made a rule to keep women out of a job that you all know women could be better at. And his
It's wild.
response was, yeah, but it wrecks the vibe.
It's wild. I'm not
Women,
I'm not surprised. There's a very heavy lad culture, boy culture, whatever you'd want to call it. It permeates everything. It's present in
absolutely.
almost everything. And I think that's almost what makes the argument of like against affirmative action or against anything of inclusivity, like we want people who are qualified for the job. If you did, you would care more about getting these people in and treating them appropriately to see if they are are qualified for the job than assuming that they aren't and barring them off. And as we see through legislation, through rules, throughout history, barring people off has always been the goal.
Right. Yeah, and I think we forget, even for those very physical jobs, because every time we talk about affirmative action, our minds, and I just did it myself, we immediately, run to the physical jobs in which we think men are stronger, women are weaker, therefore men should have priority. But when we think about those jobs and we think about, forget the physicality, the mental stability and endurance that that job really takes, you know? Like when we really get into policing, right? And obviously we're talking about defunding the police and complete restructuring of the way we train. A good chunk of that is because we've trained these young men and women to be militant, to be
Mhm.
to be soldiers. It's the same structure, but soldiers don't work on protecting and serving. Soldiers work on killing and destroying. Those are two very different goals. And to go to
Mhm.
a job every day, that's scary. Let's all admit that being a police officer wouldn't be enjoyable. It wouldn't be fancy free. You need to have a tight mind,
Yeah.
right? To me, that's like way up here on the expectation. Rather than just writing that one psychological test so we know you're not Ted Bundy, maybe maybe that, you know what I mean? I can train somebody how to lift weights and get bigger and get thicker. Can I train somebody to be more emotionally sound and balanced, or are there certain people that are just better at that? I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist.
Yeah. I also think the mental thing tends to play a role more often than the physical. Every single like horror story I've ever heard about interactions with law enforcement have been police not keeping it cool, not keeping their calm, not being able to diffuse situations. And I never want to take away from the difficulty or, you know, any respect from police officers who are deserving and who do go out and do this difficult
100%.
job. It
Yep.
would be absolutely terrifying. Someone can pull a gun on you in less than 5 seconds and shoot and kill you. And
Mhm.
it's very understandable for that to be for that to impact you. There's nothing to take away from that. But it is a conversation of this is a specific role with those specific risks. We need people in there who can handle it
Mm.
on the mentally, physically, yes, but of course mentally. And I feel like it's the fact that it's a difficult job or an unsafe job is used as a crutch a lot when police officers do something wrong. And
Mhm.
it's like I don't give that same crutch to a doctor or to a
Yeah.
surgeon or to anybody else. These are positions that have high stress level, a high criteria of or high metrics that need to be met, and you need to be able to do that. That's
Mhm.
that's the job you're signing up for. So,
And I think the bigger, I mean, and then we're going to talk about structural problems, because think the bigger problem is the way we train, the way we admit people, and not just train to get in, right? But throughout your 25-year long career, what do we do? Because again, I've known police officers, especially that work. I live in the suburb, right, and a lot of what they deal with are pretty horrific domestic abuse situations. That's pretty much what they walk into a lot, right? So to deal with that kind of, or anything involving kids, and to deal with that, it's not even happening to you, but every single day, you see the worst of what people have to offer. The worst. That is your job. Your job is to walk into house A and see what a horrible situation that is and how many people are getting hurt and whatever. And then you're supposed to what? Go home and watch Friends, right? You're supposed to
Yeah,
shrug it off. That's a
it's
level
weird.
of insanity to expect that, right?
Yeah, I
And so I
agree.
think that part needs to change. But that goes to, I think, because when I talk about sexism, a lot of people are like, oh, Joanne, well, first of all, you're gay. You obviously hate men. No, why would I hate men? I don't have to sleep with them. Like, they're great. I don't have to pick up their underwear. Like, guys in my life are great. I don't have any problems. And it's not necessarily the men, it's the prioritization of characteristics that we're all losing out from, right? It's the
Mhm.
prioritization of rationality and, a lack of emotion and being able to be focused and I'm like, what we're doing there is we are prioritizing A, the wrong characteristics, and B, excluding things that A, make us human, and B, allow us to change, allow us to feel, allow us, right? And these guys, and it's still predominantly men on a police force, they don't have that room. Everybody will say, oh, they should go see a therapist. No, they're not. Oh, hun, nobody's going. Nobody's, unless you're ordered to do so, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're weak, you're breaking, and I think if you don't need to see a therapist, you're on a Dexter level. And now I'm
Mm.
nervous. You
Yeah.
either should be seeing it once a week or you've shut it off altogether because of what you've seen. And now I'm more nervous.
Hmm.
And I think that hurts men,
It does.
you
Absolutely.
know?
I was talking about this the other day actually with one of my friends, and I was saying how a lot of the conversations around patriarchy, if you will, or systemic anything that has to do with how we treat men versus women, how we raise men versus women,
Mhm.
has a really aggressive impact on men. And the
100%.
conversation is often about how it impacts women through how men treat women. But I think we do leave out a good percentage of the mental anguish men must be going through to not be able to express half of their range of emotions because
Mhm.
it has such a negative connotation. And there's also I don't think people talk enough about discernment in those scenarios either. There's such a lack of nuance and balance. Because I will say, to a certain extent, being able to keep yourself composed
Mhm.
or stoic in certain scenarios is beneficial for everyone. If you are going
100%.
to have a mental breakdown over a popped tire, it's going to be a difficult life for you. But it goes into the unhealthy territory when you no longer can access those emotions that you should be able to, when you no longer can discern if you should be feeling empathy or naturally are having empathy. We have a problem. If you
Mhm.
no longer can express how you're feeling and have just suppressed it, have a habit of suppressing it, can't access it, we have a problem, because
Mhm.
whatever you suppress comes forward in aggressive and ugly ways that you won't be able to control. And so I think where I hear a lot of young men especially confused is like talking about that balance. What emotions do I express? When do I express them? I don't want to be seen a certain way if I express this. And it's like, one, I hate that
Mhm.
that's what you're thinking. I hate that that's what you've been taught. I hate, and that's for everyone. Women have the same but different, whatever. But I hate that that's how you feel and what you've been taught. But it's also like there should be no expectation for you to be inhumanely stoic. That's
Mhm.
not the expectation we should be setting for you. There
Yeah.
should be a balance there, the ability to say, okay, I can handle this. I'm going to stay calm, but your emotions are still valid and you should still be taught and allowed and welcome to express them.
And there's a couple points, and those are all amazing points, because I think that number one, we don't teach that. So
Hmm.
we don't encourage that. We don't train that. It's 2022. I've been a teacher for a long time, and I haven't seen a lot of trans like a lot of change in that capacity. I truly haven't. I've seen our young women get a lot bigger of a range of what we are allowed to do and express ourselves as and dress as. Don't get me wrong, there's limits and of
Hmm.
course, but again, here's the inherent part. A lot of people think, oh, Joanna, because was my uncle said, oh, in his house, there's blue jobs and pink jobs. I said, you're a moron. What are you talking about? He said, well, there's jobs I do and there's jobs Linda does. And he goes, and we just joke, they're pink and blue jobs. And I said, and it's just a division of labor. And it's never been the division of labor that's a problem, ever. Because, like, I have a fiance, we have a division of labor. Like, she does certain things, I do certain things. The division of labor is not the problem. The problem and the inherent sexism has always been the prioritization of what labor is more important, what
Hmm.
labor has higher value. And I think with men, when we don't give them that full picture and we allow women the latitude, we're allowing women latitude not because we like women better, but because when we become a little bit more masculine, not maybe my masculine, because there's limits, and they're like, Janet, when you cut your hair, you
That's
took
not
it a
my
step
hair.
too far, but because we're getting better. That's the underlying assumption. When women become more masculine in some degree, right? Look, she's more rational. She's less emotional. She wants to be a doctor. That's amazing. We're taking steps up the ladder. Whereas
Mm.
when a man wants to be a nurse, like nurses in Ontario, just so you know, make 100 grand a year. It is a great, right? For all those people wanting to be nurses, it is a great. It's a hard job, and God knows during COVID, but it is an amazing job with great benefits and great security and all of that kind of stuff. But meanwhile, still to this day, any guy that chooses to be a nurse, the first question people ask him, whether it's outward or not, is,
Are you gay?
"Are you gay? And why didn't you be a doc? Why aren't you a doctor?"
Oh, true.
Nobody asks, right? You got to. You only could be a nurse.
Or
Nobody says.
isn't that a girl's job?
There it is. So we have these limits on guys, and then we turn around in the same breath and say, this damn patriarchy. You know what I mean?
Cogn-
Why can't men be better?
Cognitive dissonance is a
It's a powerful thing.
it's a
It
powerful
is.
thing.
Because
There's also such an interesting because people I've brought up the whole conversation about why like certain the division of labor like in households before, and people
Mhm.
have argued with me about it, and I'm like, look at what happens when men and women get divorced and how men categorize who brings the most to the table. The
Yeah.
same men who have stay-at-home wives or girlfriends that are doing the pink jobs, I guess,
I don't
will
want to
be
make that a sting.
will be like, she doesn't deserve anything. I'm the one who went out and made the money. I'm the
There
one
it
who did
is.
this. I'm the one who did that. As if raising a family, keeping a home, cooking meals, etc., are less on the totem pole than working a 9 to 5. It's such a skewed perspective.
Well, I think that's the intersectionality of capitalism. And I know you're a strong capitalist and all,
I was
but
like,
but when we give somebody of value on the job they do, they get a level of respect.
yeah.
And that value then, when women or men for that matter, because let's be honest, men that are stay-at-home husbands take, some pretty good jobs as well. But when we have no number value associated with the stay-at-home labor, it can't
Mm-hmm.
have any respect. And it sure as hell has no power.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It can't have power because you don't have a bank account with your money and and I love when everybody says, "Yeah, but when you're married, half's yours." I'm like, "Yeah, but that's not how it plays out." If you really believe that, then whoever goes out and gets the job, they come home and they quickly transfer as a payment 50% of their paycheck every time to their partner's bank account. And then let's play it like that.
Yeah.
Then you all can fight over how much you spend on the couch and there's no upper hand, right? Or
Yeah,
whatever
exactly.
it is you're going to fight over.
Exactly.
Um, but I think all of this requires conversation that start with some really embarrassing truths. I think, and this is the hard one, I think, for people to swallow. I think before anybody can move anywhere on any of this, you have to admit your prejudice, your biases, and your stereotypes. And I don't think anybody, it's like we are terrified to put it on the table because it's embarrassing, because we know we're not supposed to have them.
Yeah,
But if we don't put them on the table and we don't all acknowledge that, how are we supposed to get around it?
that's the thing.
Right?
Then it has to be people have to feel, I guess, safe enough to do that. It has to be a productive conversation.
And we're so in the opposite space right now.
So so much so.
We can't, and we're going to get around to censorship because I think that's something, it goes, it's right into this, right? We're trying to have these amazing conversations, but at every step, people are, you know, it's, and again, I don't want to disavow issues of canceling certain things or undermining certain things. I think there's things that are dangerous that we can talk through, but
Yeah.
these extremities that we put ourselves in, where you're either, with Trump or you're a communist, like quite literally, those are your two options, you
And I
know?
wish I wish too, before we had conversations like this, people would understand that there are more good people who either live a different life than you, don't understand something, or just have a different perspective than people who are evil and hateful. There are
100%.
more of those, always.
100%.
And I think something that frustrates me is you have groups of people that are just in the middle, trying to navigate the regular life, learning new things each day, picking different opinions based on the new information that's presented to them, that get lumped into these polarized categories and immediately attacked when they do try to have conversations, when they do try to admit their biases, when they do come forward. And if that's how, things go, I'm not surprised that nobody wants to ever be honest about anything, because
Right.
why would you?
Yeah, like, and it's interesting because, and then we ingrain ourselves. It's like we double down in the camp we've been assigned.
Yeah.
And I will never step out of this camp. Do you know what I mean? Like, I am ingrained in whatever your camp is. I am ingrained in it. I'm going to double down in it. And then you see things that are happening right now, which again goes directly against what you and I are talking about, which is censorship of everything, right? Now,
Yeah.
you said at the beginning, and here's going to be the $10,000 question.
Oh no.
What
Within
are the,
reason.
yep, what's the, so we're going to say, we're going to both, I think you and I are both on the side of censorship is bad in the general picture,
Hmm.
and we talked before, and I made a joke of like the old school Jerry Springer shows where the KKK would come out and rip off their mask. I'm like, let them be on TV because they look stupid. And when people see that kind of stupid and see, they're good, let it all be out there, right? Because if you don't talk about it, they still exist. They just exist
In the dark.
subversively,
Yep.
which,
Where things get worse.
oh, where things get so worse. But we have to have rational limits. And what are those lines and who get to set them?
Who gets to set them, I think, depends on if we're talking about censorship from a government perspective or
Let's start
censorship
there.
from let's start there.
Let's start at the government. We'll get to Spotify and Joe Rogan and all of that kind of that situation. Because let's start at the government. Because at the end of the day, when people complain about their First Amendment rights, P.S., you're just, and I would love Canadians to stop complaining about that because we don't have First Amendment rights. So that, number one, that would be awesome. If well,
USA.
we have freedom of speech. They're just not called
USA.
USA. We have freedom of speech. It's just in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It just reads differently. That's all I'm saying. You all have a Bill of Rights. We have the Charter. We don't say First Amendment. But nonetheless, freedom of speech. We all have, and you and I both want as much freedom of speech as we possibly can. And when I say I want my rights protected, it's not from Spotify. That's not who's protecting or intruding on my freedom. It's not you when you tell me to shut up. It's not my mom when she tells me to cut it out. Like, none of my freedom of speech is not being curtailed there in a constitutional way. That's only the government. So let's also assume the government gets to lead this.
Mhm.
We elect them. Assumedly, we live in a democracy. We elect them. We can talk about electoral reform another podcast, but because there's problems. But they're the ones that get to make the rules. So how and I think the primary place they get to make the rules. Well, where do you think the first place, the most important place the government gets to make the rules?
What do you mean?
Like, the government, whatever legislation the government's going to pass on freedom of speech or on censorship, wherever the government gets to censor, where do you think the most important places that they get to decide what can and can't be said? Is it in the government itself? Is it in legislative
Oh,
pieces? Is it in the law? Wait a minute, I'm going to give you more. Is it during protest? Is it in school? Where do we start?
I think school. I think free speech needs to be absolute. I don't think the government should be censoring anything unless, and this would be a heavy unless, a heavy
Mhm.
unless you could somehow, even then I don't think I would go for it. Even then I don't think I would go for it. I don't think the government should be censoring anything. I think
Can I
free
give you?
speech has to be absolute.
Okay, can I give you a what if?
Do it.
What if my grade 5 teacher is teaching us that the Holocaust never happened? Freedom of speech?
Mm.
What if? I got to give you another one. I was going to pile them on because they
Okay.
all make me feel uncomfortable. What if my grade 9 teacher said that slavery was actually the best thing for the American economy and we should be proud of what we've accomplished through that?
My question then would be though,
As a teacher,
wouldn't that be a contrast of like the curriculum
history?
aspect?
Yeah, but you guys have a funny you guys have a funny way of writing or not writing curriculum because I've recently found out that depends on the state, it depends on the county. And so every school, like there are some places where the county itself gets to dictate what, and I just did a TikTok about this, but like what is in the curriculum, or even better, what can't be in the curriculum,
Interesting.
right?
I don't
That's
think they
not
should be able to do
federal.
that. That's
That's
something I
not
think
federal.
that should be federally controlled, in my opinion.
Okay, but let's say that let's wipe out all, let's say, whoo, you're going to get all these states mad at us, but we'll wipe out all state power and
Yep.
say the federal government gets to mandate grade 5, whatever.
Mhm.
And they say you have to teach the curriculum that we've provided. Are you comfortable with that? And you can't step outside of it. Under Trump, are you comfortable with that?
Mm. I want to say yes, but wait, I want to. Well, okay. So actually, let me explain. Where my yes is coming from is that because I think that education should be all like the same, I guess you would say.
Uniformed, yeah.
Exactly, uniform. I'm inherently making the assumption that we are telling the truth in our education and
Oh,
that we are
that's
doing
hard.
that. Exactly. So that's
But
the
we're
thing.
not.
I'm
Yeah.
not countering in like you have to teach you have to teach the curriculum we provided for us. What if the curriculum is that? What if the
We're
curriculum
lacking.
is Holocaust
Look,
didn't
I'll
happen?
use Canada. I love to slam on the US because y'all make it so easy. But I'll use Canada right now.
Listen.
I'll use Canada. The eye roll. For those who are just listening, that was a really big eye roll. So in Canada, we have committed and admittedly very recently a horrible cultural genocide against our Indigenous population. Now, I've been a teacher for 20 years. Are you
Damn.
surprised by that? Are you surprised? But are you surprised I'm admitting that? You're like, what?
It was just the same way people are like, you're so calm. It was just the ease of conversation. Yeah, yeah.
Here's the interesting part. It was never in so in Canada, curriculum is a lot more controlled than in the States. It's established provincially. The provincial government sets a educational curriculum that is applied to elementary and secondary schools. So it's true for all of Ontario, all of Quebec, whatever. So it's not federal, which I do agree it should be federal. But I would say it's been maybe 6 years, 6 years since we legitimately started talking about residential schools in our curriculum, legitimately started talking about treaty rights, legitimately started talking about the abuse and the laws and the damage that's been purposefully, illegally done to our Indigenous community the last 6 years. So, 7 years ago, when I was talking about it, or how, because I've been talking about it for a long time,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have been teaching the curriculum, but I would have been right.
Yeah.
So now what do we do? Because I want to leave room for being right. I just don't want to leave room for, and I'll give you another horrible example since we're on Bash Canada for a minute. James Keekstra was a grade 10 history teacher in Alberta for years, pre internet. And he taught his kids for his entire career that the Holocaust was an exaggeration, never happened.
Yikes.
There it is. Yikes, right?
I think also my contention is like whose job it is to do what. I just don't want people put in prison for having narratives or having opinions or saying things that might be offensive or problematic or counter the government. But I
Mhm.
don't think the school should be allowing teachers to do that or say that either. I don't think that's the government,
But what's
you
the
know.
line? I think you and I both say, but it always is the government because education is a governmental institution. So, what line do we draw for the teacher saying, let's use both those situations? Me teaching about the cultural genocide of the indigenous population, specifically directed towards the indigenous kids, me talking about that before it was okay, before it was in the
Mhm.
curriculum, and this guy saying that the Holocaust never happened. Now, it's clearly one's good, one's bad.
I was gonna say
But
one's
how
true,
do
one's
we
false.
right? But how do we legislate that? Is it because I can be proven true? Like it would have been very hard to be proven true when I was saying it on a bigger level because there wasn't a lot of admission about it, right? The
Mm.
government's only recently in this country, A, been taken to court and then B, admitted a lot more of what's gone on. But how do we legislate that?
Hmm.
How do we have that conversation? Because I'm sure and James Keekstra, FYI, was fired, and he tried to sue, and it wasn't a breach of his rights because what they said was and here is the key. That was an element of hate speech in the sense that creating a false narrative that would create, not directly, he wasn't saying go out and kill anybody, but he was creating a false narrative that would then justify a level of anti Semitism. So
Mhm.
that might be the lane, but then now we're in COVID, right? Who gets to create a false narrative and what does it look like in order to put people's lives at risk? When when is that hate speech?
Ugh, people are so annoying.
And that's the bottom line.
It's
True.
because it's just like it's one of those things that makes you go, I wish we could just err on the sense of like I wish we could just err on the side of common sense. But
Uh-huh.
that's the least descriptive, the least binding, the least black and white thing you could say.
Absolutely. Because then we start mucking around with terminology, right? You have all those
Exactly.
morons in North Carolina that are saying, "We're not Nazis, we're freedom fighters," with the swastika on their shoulder, right? They've just changed the vernacular. They've just changed the name. Now what do we do when they're walking around with those? See, I think to me that flag should be illegal. Period. But here's the irony: Hitler stole it.
Yeah.
Most people, right? It's a Hindu symbol of luck. God, the Hindus must be real upset,
Wouldn't you be furious? Wouldn't you
right?
be furious?
We have this lovely symbol of luck. I had kids, so we have a Hindu temple not too far from my school. And one day I had like 6 kids come running out from lunch, losing their minds, saying, Joanna, you have to come down. They have desecrated, I don't even know if they use that word, the side of the Hindu temple. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just horrible. Come look, come look. I had to get up, I had to go down, and I looked at the side, and there it was. A swastika. But you know for those who don't know, Hitler just took the symbol and turned it clockwise to the right. So if you could imagine it just straight, that's the Hindu symbol for luck.
Yeah.
And so I had to have a conversation with my kids. I'm like, oh, guys, look, not only was Hitler crazy, he stole everything, either from Italy or from the Hindus or whatever. And that's what it was. But a symbol, then what do we do? Do we ban the symbol?
No. That would
We
have
don't
been
ban the
jarring for
symbol.
me too. And I feel like that's, I guess, where I have to be more particular, just very aware of my subjective opinion versus the objective, because I do tend to favor the free speech act the free speech aspect, if I could learn to
Sure.
speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because again, it's like then we have to have the conversation of who gets to pick what's okay to ban and what's not okay to ban.
Yeah.
Once we ban this, where does it stop? Where does it start? And I think I've seen swastika imagery like in real life twice, and it was the most like
Yeah. Right?
I was leaving my apartment condo once, and there was a woman who had one tattooed on the back of her neck, and I was like,
Stop.
it was huge. It was huge. And I'm just like, I'm pretty sure I took a picture. It was the most strange thing I've ever seen. And then there was a time when I was, I think, probably 8, 9, or 10 out to eat with my family, and there was a guy in full Nazi garb, like as if he had purchased it at I don't know. And it was like the most jarring thing I've ever seen. But to a certain extent, again, I still feel like it's all rooted in these conversations,
Mhm.
in educating people, in having conversations with people about why they believe what they believe, what they've experienced to make them think this way. Like, because I also feel like there's got to be so many people who have such distasteful or aggressive beliefs that are just bound to them because that's where they come from or what they've always been around.
Well,
And there's
there,
got to
there,
be some way to break that.
and
There's
that
got to be
goes
some way to break
back
it.
to the grade one teacher who is allowed to teach that the Holocaust never happened, or the grade one. By the way, like, so I don't know if you've heard about Indiana and Oklahoma. They're passing these different laws, or they're trying to pass these different laws. I think Oklahoma, one of theirs is the Religious Protection Act,
Mm.
and it basically stipulates this: a teacher cannot teach a student anything that conflates or that contradicts their deeply held religious beliefs. And if a teacher, I know,
Huh? What do
I
people? What do
know,
you think school is for?
you
Like what?
got to see. Look, you got to see my last TikTok. I almost had a nerd talk about all upset. I had to read it first of all because it was so
Okay,
many things.
I was in the car. We did look at your last TikTok, and I said the same thing when I was in the car. I was like, "What do people think school is for? Like, what are they like? Are we going to color rainbows every day from kindergarten to graduation? Like, what are we doing?
There it is. So if we
What are we doing?"
allow for censorship, but it's so hard because if I say no censorship, then I can't stop those same schools from sitting kids down and let's say, I don't always mean to slam on Christianity because it's not about that, but have a narrow minded, if you do A, B, and C, you're going to hell. If you do this, you're going to heaven. So we're going to focus on this. These are, you know what I mean? Like that's what
Yeah,
that those. Let's be honest. These lessons are all about making sure kids can't identify, with the gender that they are. Kids can't come out as I mean, it's all about. It really is a pendulum swing against that. But if I don't censor, like, I don't want to censor because I don't want books being burned like these yahoos in Tennessee. I don't want people excluding LGBTQ. I don't want people excluding CRT. I don't want any of that. But if I say there is, because I'm still trying to protect kids from somebody sitting them down and saying the Holocaust never happened, and whatever, they're like, whatever kind of bigotry they want to teach.
I just hate that. I hate that it's, I don't feel like the blockage of allowing everything is the equivalent to censorship. I don't feel like having
Okay.
like a specific curriculum that can be pushed back against or amended or whatever the case may be, saying this is our school curriculum. The Holocaust happened. You are not allowed to, veer outside of that. I don't feel like that's censorship. I feel like that's having, like, you know what I mean? It doesn't seem like, and maybe that's just a semantic thing or it's genuinely just a feeling, but there's a difference there. I'm not, I'm, the school is not telling you that you as a citizen can't have those beliefs or go out and spout those beliefs on the side of the
Yeah.
street. But you in our private or public institution where we have rules and a curriculum that is based, hopefully, on factual information, cannot
Mhm.
just freestyle with inaccurate information. I don't feel like that's
Okay.
the same as censorship, is it?
100%, but I guess what I always worry about in school, and obviously, anyway, and I say to my kids all the time, I'm very rarely scared of hearing bias. Because you know what? My kids are smart. Kids are smart. They're going to fact check your butt until the cows come home. Want to know why? Because the internet's in their pocket. So go ahead and try to say something like that. Here's what I'm deathly afraid of. I'm afraid of what we omit altogether. I'm afraid of what we don't even know we're supposed to know, right? And we can't fact check something that hasn't even been a part of the curriculum. So just like looking at Canada, when I was a kid, we never, it wasn't even a conversation. I had no idea. That was purposefully omitted. So when you purposefully omit things, then it is that level of censorship is there.
Yeah,
I'll give you an
definitely.
example. When you
Definitely.
all talk about the Vietnam War, how's that go? Just out of
Oh,
curiosity.
I don't think I remember.
I'm just thinking it goes a little different than it goes up here, probably. I know
Most.
you guys are full of it when you talk about the War of 1812 because we came down and caused some havoc. You guys don't talk about that.
I mean, look, if you guys need your claim to fame
We
on
do. We do.
next to our resume, I guess you can have it. But
Right to
yeah,
think.
no, it's a whole, it is. It's a whole conversation. It's a whole. I First of all, the omission aspect, absolutely. My when I was watching your video, my first takeaway was, one, what do people think they're going to school for? To be like coddled
Mhm.
the whole day. But two, teach everything.
Yeah.
Objectively, teach everything. That's the point, or everything that fits. It isn't to pick and choose what we want to talk about that occurred. It's just, yeah. I'm When it comes to people just denying events or denying things or being, not telling the truth, then it's
Mhm.
like, why would the school want that to be there? I just feel like that's a different category than your free speech aspect.
But is it? But I don't know if it is. Like, okay, so I think of, let's say, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, the big, huge, horrible thing he did, right? And I think about that, and I think about the way that people spoke about that, and how much of the history was left out, which I didn't even know until wait, because I chose to, as an adult, immerse myself in that dialogue about how football games, football players didn't even come out and stand up for the national anthem until a certain part in your history because it was a show of patriotism in order to support what was going on after 9/11. I'm just like, oh, oh, I didn't know. But it's so easy to omit that, right? It's so easy to talk about. And in a course like mine, I guess it's difficult because a lot of people talk to me on, TikToks or whatever, like, do you teach communism up there? I'm like, yeah, I teach all economic theories. Yes, I teach communism, capitalism, democratic socialism. I teach political theories from, all different. I teach about Marxism. I teach about, conservatism, liberalism. I teach them all.
I think it's also a lot of people who don't remember what being in school was like what actually going to school. Because in my
Yeah.
experience, the omission was really the only issue. It was not things being taught incorrectly, it was things just not being talked about.
But there is just, yeah, but there is just so. horrifically powerful, the things that aren't being talked about, because the things
Exactly.
that aren't being talked about are the things we're shameful of, we're embarrassed by, and we just want to admit, and that's true of every single country. I have lots of kids from different parts of the world that come to my school,
Oh
and
yeah.
they'll say, "Oh, we don't talk about that."
Oh
And
yeah.
but they trust their government. I said, "You shouldn't then."
I'm
The
sure
minute
I'm sure each country could, you could tell them to teach about the same war, and each each answer would
right?
be completely different.
100 different ways. And I don't know how to, people are like, well, Joanna, when you teach, are you completely objective? And I always say, absolutely not. How, nobody walking this planet is completely objective in anything they do. If you want me to get up there and say World War I started in 1914 and ended in 1918, here are the teams, here's what happened, here's the end result. They wrote the Treaty of Versailles, please move on. I've done nothing. What a waste. Nobody cares. And it doesn't have any relevance, right? That's like you it's the interpretation, it's the what if, it's the how does this affect us today? And all of those questions are subjective, every single one,
Yeah.
right? But for me to stand up, and this is what drives me mental about any teacher or anybody in general, say I'm 100% objective. I'm like, you're 100% full of crap. You can't be. I think, again, we go back to admitting our bias, our position, where we come from, where we got our education from. It all holds subjectivity.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people know the difference between that, or subjectivity and objectivity, or how much of a role it plays in your perspective. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think people really understand that.
And I don't know how to, and again, trying to get at this without making, and then we have a whole other world of problems because we have this beautiful thing called the internet, which is so incredibly powerful and destructive all at the same time, because it's like now I can talk to somebody who lives in Zimbabwe and their grandmother can tell me about colonization, and that story will be better than any book I ever read. But instead, I spend all of my time, and I know you and I are going to make a laugh, on TikTok. Those are choices we make, right? Or I can go on the internet and find out how aliens created COVID so that JFK could come back to life. It's really a hard choice. It's very, there's a lot of trickiness, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's why education to me, and I know I'm a teacher, but education to me is so much more important today than ever before, because we have all of this insanity. But how do we mitigate the negative? How do we?
No, I completely agree. I think one of the biggest things is this comes down to arming people to be able to be,
Mhm.
media literate, to be
That's
able to
hard.
sift through information, to
Mm.
actually look for information that isn't just confirmation bias,
But that's
um,
what we look for.
to have to have those conversations. Yeah, and
Sorry, can you explain just for everybody listening what confirmation bias is or what an echo chamber is, just in case people don't get the terminology?
seeking out information that confirms what you already believe or what you want to believe. It's the equivalent of typing into Google, or believing that elephants paint the treetops at night, and then typing into Google, why don't I see the elephants at night who paint the treetops? When
Right,
do the
right.
elephants come out? Like, things that are going to confirm that, as opposed to being like, what happens at night to the treetops? you know? Um, but I don't know. It's I think when you start to talk about the confirmation bias, and talk about why people believe what they believe and think what they think, you open a door of just so many different reasons why people exist the way they do, what
Yeah.
type of things they're seeking out, and why they're seeking those things. Because it's not just as simple. If it was just as simple of like, I want to know the truth and I want to live my life with the truth,
The
etc.,
truth. Yeah.
the truth, we'd be able to solve this literally in this podcast. But there are definitely groups of people that exist that are happy existing in whatever fantasies they create for themselves.
Yeah, of
So then
course they do.
it, yeah, it begs the question of, why? Why is this the answer that you need? Why is this the circumstance that you want?
That's a great question. Makes us feel good. Right? Everybody, it's not just the internet we seek out confirmation bias. It's every
Yeah.
place we step to, right? Our family, if it confirms who we are and they love us, great, we're there. If not, you're toxic, I'm out. Our friends that we choose, right? And I don't mean to undervalue families that are toxic, but you get my
Yeah.
application here. Our friends that we choose. We don't surround ourselves with people that are going to sit down and intelligently and directly oppose us every day. It's freaking exhausting. I want to sit down with people who, and you're drawn to people, the vibe thing, you're drawn to people that think the way you think. That's why culturally, racially, even sex wise, like girls have girls nights. Why? Because we get each other. Well, why is
Mhm.
that? Because we've been socialized to get each other. Why is that important? Because it confirms and it legitimizes all the things that we think in the day, and it makes us feel good, right? We don't want to work in an environment where we're constantly fighting that.
No,
If
we want to
you
have to
want
face our own
comfort,
biases, our own thoughts, our own anything that could be negative about us.
absolute, that's not enjoyable. Nobody wants to do that,
No.
right? If I'm going to smoke cigarettes, I'm going to go hang out with smokers. I'm not going to sit around people talking about cancer and emphysema
Yep.
all day. I'm going to
Yep.
go hang out in the smoking section so I can have a good time with my life. But there is and then I start thinking seriously about that's why sort of, and this is going to sound crazy, well, I don't know, crazy, enforced diversity is so important. Like, for example, especially the majority culture, I get to walk around in a bubble a lot. um, I'm going to pick and choose when I'm going to step out of that bubble,
Mm.
right? And that's why I think people of different minorities get to see the world in a clearer picture because they get the majority culture because they have to, they're embedded in it, and they get where they see from, right? So they're already smarter. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean that they see it from a different angle. It's like when you're watching a movie, if you just watched a movie from front on, right? That's the only way you ever see the movie. And somebody else watches the movie from front on and they sit at the side and watch the whole movie, they see the bigger picture.
You have to have different life experiences and
You
different
have to.
perspectives, yeah, to
You
shape.
have to. And then the majority culture, and the majority culture we're talking about in North America is obviously, white, straight, predominantly male, sure, Christian. But when you sit in that majority culture, you also don't want to be told you're an idiot. I get it. You don't want to be set. You don't want somebody to come up to you and say, I know better, because you don't see the full picture.
Mm.
That conversation is so important to have in order to have a truthful transfer of power. But we're coming at that conversation. And I get the anger. Why wouldn't you be pissed? Why wouldn't you be angry if you're not sitting in that? You've been ruled by it, controlled by it, manipulated by it. You're supposed to what? Go up and ask nicely? That's very Martin Luther King, but I don't know if we're all having that kind of inner peace.
I guess people have to, I guess that's where I hate to say logic kicks in. There's probably a better word for it. But you do have to account for the praxis of what you're trying to accomplish. You can't just come out. I mean, it of course depends what we are specifically talking about, because there are certainly scenarios and situations where it's past the conversation angle and you do have to take action. But I
What's
mean,
the example? Wait, what's past the conversation angle?
um, what's a good just like
We can no longer talk about it. We're throwing down what's past the conversation.
I don't know if we have something right now that's happening, but like a large percentage of the civil rights movement, things that were physical then, it made sense that it was physical because
Okay.
they
We're
were
not
past the point of asking nicely.
I like Malcolm X, yes. So we're not turning the other cheek anymore, by any means necessary. If you're going to give me violence, I'm going to give it back. Um, and so there it is, right? So that you have that kind of on the street. But I would still say we're still there. Are we
I
past
think
that?
I think we have more levels to what we discuss now. And I think there are more, because of those levels and because of those, the language that we've created to talk about the problems that exist, some stuff might be there, but a lot of stuff isn't. I still think there are a lot of things that we could have conversations about and say that we need some sort of legislative action. We need some sort of, this needs to be fixed here,
Mhm.
without coming out swinging towards people who still don't understand what they even have to do with it.
Yeah.
And I think a good percentage of those people who don't understand what they have to do with it would be, are closer to the, I'm just a normal person. I'm a good person. If you can
Mhm.
explain this to me, maybe I'll get it.
Yeah.
And they aren't the type of people who are just like, I don't care. This has nothing to do with me, whatever the case may be. I think there's more of the former than the latter. And that's where I think those conversations come in. Because I have spoken to friends of mine or people in general. So I grew up in upstate New York, sometimes in the city, but primarily in upstate New York. Very, very white.
Interesting. Yep.
I went to school with kids who flew Confederate flags. I don't know why, because we're literally as high north as you can get until you hit
Do they
Canada.
understand anything that it means? Okay.
But they did on the back of their trucks every day.
Of
And
course.
I have always been, and I don't want to paint this as like, this is the way you need to be, because being this type of person takes a lot of mental energy. And
Yeah.
depending where you come from and what you've been through, you're either going to have that bandwidth or you're not. And again, there are points when it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
It's something is actually wrong and
Sure.
actionable. But
Yeah.
I've always been that type of person that's like, why are you flying that flag? Or why do you think this way? What can we talk about to make this make sense?
Hmm.
And almost every time I've ever had a conversation like that, they get it. They
Hmm.
didn't get it before because that conversation never existed, or the
Yeah.
examples of what they've had or have been shown that have created their perspectives of the world, or of other people, have been negative or extremely biased in their favor of what their parents want them to believe, or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
so I think that as much as there are still situations that might need to be met with action that's beyond a conversation, I think there are people that get institutional racism, or
Yeah.
that get systemic problems, if you take the time to explain them to them. And it's very clear that you're not saying you are the problem, but
Hmm.
this is the problem.
I think it's also like, you and I sit from, a level of privilege on different levels, and you're
Mhm.
obviously very educated, which gives you the language, to have those conversations rather than just running on the emotion. And a lot of people will say that to me too, because you get a lot, I'll get some homophobic stuff. And I always say there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. And I
Yeah.
say stupidity is a choice. People are going to choose to stay stupid because they're comfortable and stupid. They're going to bang their heads against the same wall until the day they die. And then there's people that are ignorant that just don't know yet. And
Yeah.
they might seem angry, they might seem aggressive, they might seem frustrated, but that's because they just don't know. And I will always take the time to teach the ignorant. But the problem is the stupid, right?
Hmm. But
And if
I would argue there's more ignorant with good intentions.
I agree, I agree, 100%. I agree. I just don't know if there's enough people that have a lot of the sort of the privileges, either with education or with a level of economic security, or a level of confidence, a level of self-esteem, because no matter what they've been like, you and I have been through whatever we've been through, but we have a healthy sense of who we are, how we stand, and how we walk around in this world with our head up. And a lot of people have been beaten so past that
Yeah.
that there's no way they can come at a conversation. They don't have,
No, I totally get it.
they just can't. And
Totally get it.
so, and I don't know if, well, I know that it's not their job either. There's the frustrating part, right? It's always the oppressed, or it's always the marginalized, or the trodden on. It's always their job to explain it to the
Hmm.
guys who have done the trampling. But when you think about the trampling, I grew up in a very I always thought this is the height of my ignorance. I thought I grew up in a very white high school, pretty affluent, whatever. I
Mm,
went back about maybe 4 years ago, right before COVID, and I walked through the halls of my school and I looked at the graduation photos, when they have all of the picture.
yeah,
Half of my school was black or brown. Half. And in
interesting.
my head, this is how blind you could be if you want to be, if you choose to be, and you're in that majority. I was also straight in high school. So in my head, I knew a handful of the girls that I was friends with, or guys that I was friends with, that might have been black or might have been brown. One girl was from, her family was originally from India. I remember her. We were good friends. That's the only person I remember. Meanwhile, there was another 30 girls on that picture with brown skin, and I have no memory of it. What the hell is that? Right?
I
That's a
went,
level of insanity.
I had 5 black kids in my entire school, I think.
Wow.
Possibly including me, but it might have been 6 including me.
Right.
Yeah, it was wild.
But I
Wild.
I was so privileged, and I had so much, and when I say this, power to completely ignore 40% of my school.
That's insane.
That's that's crazy. And I and I went back there. I went with a good friend of mine, and we're looking at it. I'm like, am I an idiot? What?
Who are these people?
Who are these people? And that's like, high school's very cliquey anyways, and so you remember your friends, but for me to categorize that easily and exclude them from my reality, that's a level of power that most white people never talk about. And I didn't even know I was imploring the power. That was a subliminal, it's just who I considered important in my world kind of
Yeah,
thing. And the level of education that I've got, like, that's, I've gotten 3 degrees, and it took me going back to my high school and looking at a damn picture to go, what? So when I think about that, and then I think, how am I supposed to get everybody else caught up? Meanwhile, I took that long, even being educated. That's It's a hard mountain.
it is. It's
We didn't even talk about Joe Rogan. I'm really
I
upset
know.
about that.
I
We need
honestly
to.
I feel like we'll have the chance because it seems like the Joe Rogan thing's still unfolding. So,
Well, yeah, I think like 110 episodes have been taken down at this point,
whew,
and
whew.
The Rock is really mad at him now. So
Yes,
there's
I saw
that.
that too.
I don't. Yeah, I
Their
mean,
Twitter beef.
but again, and I would love if you could come back and talk seriously about censorship, and
Yeah,
seriously about, even as it applies to television and different mediums that aren't government run. You know, because I think that would be an incredibly interesting conversation, and how it's a reflection still of money and power, but just in
definitely.
a
That's
different way.
definitely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Look, we've been on here forever. I'll just roll this into one episode. That's fine. That's it. I like it though. Do you want to give a quick pitch for where they can find you, where people can find you?
Sure, I am on TikTok. That's probably my biggest platform at Danisha.Carter. I'm on Twitter as well, Danisha Carter 4. Instagram, Danisha Carter. Come talk to me. All that.
Amazing. And I'm going to put all of your stuff in the little description that I'm going to put right down here, for everybody to see and click on. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you for having
I
me.
think we got close to solving stuff. I mean, we're not far off, just maybe one or two more,
Yeah, 1 or 2 more episodes and it'll be resolved, I'm
and
sure.
we'll wrap it up. All right, fantastic. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I will see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat station. Dismissed.